Then you haven't given up the idea? I thought perhaps you had by this time. Of course not. I fondly thought at first that you felt as I do about that, as you were so mixed up in Christminster Anglicanism, and Mr. Phillotson. I have no respect for Christminster whatever, except, in a qualified degree, on its intellectual side, said Sue Brighthead earnestly. My friend I spoke of took that out of me. He was the most irreligious man I ever knew, and the most moral. And intellect at Christminster is new wine in old bottles. The medievalism of Christminster must go, be sloughed off, or Christminster itself will have to go. To be sure, at times one couldn't help having a sneaking liking for the traditions of the old faith, as preserved by a section of the thinkers there in touching and simple sincerity, but when I was in my saddest, rightest mind, I always felt, oh, ghastly glories of saints, dead limbs of gibbeted gods. Sue, you are not a good friend of mine to talk like that. Then I won't, dear Jude. The emotional throat note had come back, and she turned her face away. I still think Christminster has much that is glorious, though I was resentful because I couldn't get there. He spoke gently, and resisted his impulse to pique her on to tears. It is an ignorant place, except as to the town people, artisans, drunkards, and paupers, she said, perverse still at his differing from her. They see life as it is, of course, but few of the people in the colleges do. You prove it in your own person. You are one of the very men Christminster was intended for when the colleges were founded, a man with a passion for learning, but no money or opportunities or friends. But you were elbowed off the pavement by the millionaires' sons. Well, I can do without what it confers. I care for something higher. And I for something broader, truer, she insisted. At present, intellect in Christminster is pushing one way and religion the other, and so they stand stock still like two rams butting each other. What would Mr. Phillotson? It is a place full of fetishists and ghost-seers. He noticed that whenever he tried to speak of the schoolmaster, she turned the conversation to some generalizations about the offending university. Jude was extremely, morbidly curious about her life as Phillotson's protégé and betrothed, yet she would not enlighten him. Well, that is just what I am too, he said. I am fearful of life, spectre-seeing always. But you are good and dear, she murmured. His heart bumped, and he made no reply. You are in the Tractarian stage just now, are you not? She added, putting on flippancy to hide real feeling, a common trick with her. Let me see. When was I there? In the year 1800 and... There's a sarcasm in that which is rather unpleasant to me, Sue. Now will you do what I want you to do? At this time I read a chapter and then say prayers, as I told you. Now will you concentrate your attention on any book of these you like, and sit with your back to me and leave me to my custom? You are sure you won't join me? I'll look at you. No, don't tease, Sue. Very well. I'll do just as you bid me, and I won't vex you, Jude, she replied, in the tone of a child who was going to be good for ever after, turning her back upon him accordingly. A small Bible other than the one he was using lay near her, and during his retreat she took it up and turned over the leaves. Jude, she said brightly, when he had finished and come back to her, will you let me make you a New Testament, like the one I made for myself at Christminster? Oh, yes. How was that made? I altered my old one by cutting up all the epistles and gospels into separate brochures and rearranging them in chronological order as written, beginning the book with Thessalonians, following on with the epistles and putting the gospels much further on. Then I had the volume rebound. My university friend, Mr. but never mind his name, poor boy, said it was an excellent idea. I know that reading it afterwards made it twice as interesting as before, and twice as understandable. said Jude, with a sense of sacrilege. "And what a literary enormity this is," she said as she glanced into the pages of Solomon's Song. "I mean the synopsis at the head of each chapter explaining away the real nature of that rhapsody. You needn't be alarmed. Nobody claims inspiration for the chapter headings. Indeed, many divines treat them with contempt. It seems the drollest thing to think of the 24 elders or bishops or whatever number they were, sitting with long faces and writing down such stuff." Jude looked pained. "You are quite Voltairian," he murmured. "Indeed? Then I won't say any more, except that people have no right to falsify the Bible. I hate such humbug as could attempt to plaster over with ecclesiastical abstractions such ecstatic, natural human love as lies in that great and passionate song." Her speech had grown spirited and almost petulant at his rebuke, and her eyes moist. "I wish I had a friend here to support me, but nobody is ever on my side." "But my dear Sue, my very dear Sue, I am not against you," he said, taking her hand, and surprised at her introducing personal feeling into mere argument. "Yes, you are, yes, you are," she cried, turning away her face that he might not see her brimming eyes. "You are on the side of the people in the training school, at least you seem almost to be. What I insist on is, that to explain such verses as this, 'Whither is thy beloved gone, O thou fairest among women?' by the note, 'The Church professeth her faith,' is supremely ridiculous." "Well then, let it be. You make such a personal matter of everything." "I am only too inclined just now to apply the words profanely. You know you are fairest among women to me, come to that." "But you are not to say it now," Sue replied, her voice changing to its softest note of severity. Then their eyes met, and they shook hands like cronies in a tavern, and Jude saw the absurdity of quarrelling on such a hypothetical subject, and she the silliness of crying about what was written in an old book like the Bible. "I won't disturb your convictions, I really won't," she went on soothingly, for now he was rather more ruffled than she. "But I did want and long to ennoble some man to high aims, and when I saw you and knew you wanted to be my comrade, shall I confess it, thought that man might be you. But you take so much tradition on trust that I don't know what to say." "Well, dear, I suppose one must take some things on trust. Life isn't long enough to work out everything in Euclid problems before you believe it. I take Christianity." "Well, perhaps you might take something worse." "Indeed I might. Perhaps I have done so." He thought of Arabella. "I won't ask what, because we are going to be very nice with each other, aren't we, and never, never vex each other any more." She looked up trustfully, and her voice seemed trying to nestle in his breast. "I shall always care for you," said Jude. "And I for you, because you are single-hearted and forgiving to your faulty and tiresome little Sue." He looked away, for that epicene tenderness of hers was too harrowing. Was it that which had broken the heart of the poor leader-writer, and was he to be the next one? But Sue was so dear. If he could only get over the sense of her sex, as she seemed to be able to do so easily of his, what a comrade she would make! For their difference of opinion on conjectural subjects only drew them closer on matters of daily human experience. She was nearer to him than any other woman he had ever met, and he could scarcely believe that time, creed, or absence would ever divide him from her. But his grief at her incredulities returned. They sat on till she fell asleep again, and he nodded in his chair likewise. Whenever he aroused himself, he turned her things and made up the fire anew. About 6 o'clock he awoke completely, and lighting a candle, found that her clothes were dry. Her chair being a far more comfortable one than his, she still slept on inside his greatcoat, looking warm as a new bun and boyish as a Ganymede. Placing the garments by her and touching her on the shoulder, he went downstairs and washed himself by starlight in the yard. 5. When he returned, she was dressed as usual. "Now could I get out without anybody seeing me?" she asked. "The town is not yet astir." "But you have had no breakfast." "Oh, I don't want any. I fear I ought not to have run away from that school. Things seem so different in the cold light of morning, don't they? What Mr. Phillotson will say I don't know. It was quite by his wish that I went there. He is the only man in the world for whom I have any respect or fear. I hope he'll forgive me, but he'll scold me dreadfully, I expect." "I'll go to him and explain," began Jude. "Oh, no, you shan't. I don't care for him. He may think what he likes. I shall do just as I choose." "But you just this moment said—" "Well, if I did, I shall do as I like for all him. I have thought of what I shall do. Go to the sister of one of my fellow students in the training school who has asked me to visit her. She has a school near Shaston, about 18 miles from here, and I shall stay there till this is blown over, and I get back to the training school again." At the last moment he persuaded her to let him make her a cup of coffee, in a portable apparatus he kept in his room for use on rising to go to his work every day before the household was astir. "Now a due bit to eat with it," he said, "and off we go. You can have a regular breakfast when you get there." They went quietly out of the house, Jude accompanying her to the station. As they departed along the street, a head was thrust out of an upper window of his lodging and quickly withdrawn. Sue still seemed sorry for her rashness, and to wish she had not rebelled, telling him at parting that she would let him know as soon as she got readmitted to the training school. They stood rather miserably together on the platform, and it was apparent that he wanted to say more. "I want to tell you something. 2 things," he said hurriedly as the train came up. "One is a warm one, the other a cold one." "Jude," she said, "I know one of them, and you mustn't." "What?" "You mustn't love me. You are to like me, that's all." Jude's face became so full of complicated glooms that hers was agitated in sympathy as she bade him adieu through the carriage window. And then the train moved on, and waving her pretty hand to him, she vanished away. Melchester was a dismal place enough for Jude that Sunday of her departure, and the Close so hateful that he did not go once to the cathedral services. The next morning there came a letter from her, which, with her usual promptitude, she had written directly she had reached her friend's house. She told him of her safe arrival and comfortable quarters, and then added, "What I really write about, dear Jude, is something I said to you at parting. You had been so very good and kind to me that when you were out of sight I felt what a cruel and ungrateful woman I was to say it, and it has reproached me ever since. If you want to love me, Jude, you may. I don't mind at all, and I'll never say again that you mustn't. Now I won't write any more about that. You do forgive your thoughtless friend for her cruelty, and won't make her miserable by saying you don't. Ever, Sue." It would be superfluous to say what his answer was, and how he thought what he would have done had he been free, which should have rendered a long residence with a female friend quite unnecessary for Sue. He felt he might have been pretty sure of his own victory if it had come to a conflict between Phillotson and himself for the possession of her. Yet Jude was in danger of attaching more meaning to Sue's impulsive note than it really was intended to bear. After the lapse of a few days he found himself hoping that she would write again, but he received no further communication, and in the intensity of his solicitude he sent another note, suggesting that he should pay her a visit some Sunday, the distance being under 18 miles. He expected a reply on the second morning after dispatching his missive, but none came. The third morning arrived. The postman did not stop. This was Saturday, and in a feverish state of anxiety about her, he sent off 3 brief lines stating that he was coming the following day, for he felt sure something had happened. His first and natural thought had been that she was ill from her immersion, but it soon occurred to him that somebody would have written for her in such a case. Conjectures were put an end to by his arrival at the village schoolhouse near Shaston on the bright morning of Sunday between 11 and 12 o'clock, when the parish was as vacant as a desert, most of the inhabitants having gathered inside the church, whence their voices would occasionally be heard in unison. A little girl opened the door. "Miss Bridehead is upstairs," she said, "and will you please walk up to her?" "Is she ill?" asked Jude hastily. "Only a little, not very." Jude entered and ascended. On reaching the landing, a voice told him which way to turn, the voice of Sue calling his name. He passed the doorway and found her lying in a little bed in a room a dozen feet square. "Oh, Sue!" he cried, sitting down beside her and taking her hand. "How is this? You couldn't write?" "No, it wasn't that," she answered. "I did catch a bad cold, but I could have written, only I wouldn't." "Why not, frightening me like this?" "Yes, that was what I was afraid of. But I had decided not to write to you any more. They won't have me back at the school, that's why I couldn't write. Not the fact, but the reason." "Well?" "They not only won't have me, but they gave me a parting piece of advice." "What?" She did not answer directly. "I vowed I never would tell you, Jude. It is so vulgar and distressing." "Is it about us?" "Yes." "But do tell me." "Well, somebody has sent them baseless reports about us, and they say you and I ought to marry as soon as possible, for the sake of my reputation. There! Now I have told you, and I wish I hadn't." "Oh, poor Sue!" "I don't think of you like that means. It did just occur to me to regard you in the way they think I do, but I hadn't begun to. I have recognized that the cousinship was merely nominal, since we met as total strangers, but my marrying you, dear Jude, why, of course, if I had reckoned upon marrying you, I shouldn't have come to you so often, and I never supposed you thought of such a thing as marrying me till the other evening, when I began to fancy you did love me a little. Perhaps I ought not to have been so intimate with you. It is all my fault. Everything is my fault, always." The speech seemed a little forced and unreal, and they regarded each other with a mutual distress. "I was so blind at first," she went on. "I didn't see what you felt at all. Oh, you have been unkind to me. You have, to look upon me as a sweetheart without saying a word, and leaving me to discover it for myself. Your attitude to me has become known, and naturally they think we've been doing wrong. I'll never trust you again." "Yes, Sue," he said simply. "I am to blame, more than you think. I was quite aware that you did not suspect till within the last meeting or two what I was feeling about you. I admit that our meeting as strangers prevented a sense of relationship, and that it was a sort of subterfuge to avail myself of it. But don't you think I deserve a little consideration for concealing my wrong, very wrong, sentiments, since I couldn't help having them?" She turned her eyes doubtfully towards him, and then looked away as if afraid she might forgive him. By every law of nature and sex, a kiss was the only rejoinder that fitted the mood and the moment, under the suasion of which Sue's undemonstrative regard of him might not inconceivably have changed its temperature. Some men would have cast scruples to the winds and ventured it, oblivious both of Sue's declaration of her neutral feelings and of the pair of autographs in the vestry chest of Arabella's parish church. Jude did not. He had, in fact, come in part to tell his own fatal story. It was upon his lips, yet at the hour of this distress he could not disclose it. He preferred to dwell upon the recognized barriers between them. "Of course, I know you don't care about me in any particular way," he sorrowed. "You ought not, and you are right. You belong to Mr. Phillotson. I suppose he has been to see you?" "Yes," she said shortly, her face changing a little, "though I didn't ask him to come. You are glad, of course, that he has been, but I shouldn't care if he didn't come any more." It was very perplexing to her lover that she should be piqued at his honest acquiescence in his rival. If Jude's feelings of love were deprecated by her, he went on to something else. "This will blow over, dear Sue," he said. "The training school authorities are not all the world. You can get to be a student in some other, no doubt." "I'll ask Mr. Phillotson," she said decisively. Sue's kind hostess now returned from church, and there was no more intimate conversation. Jude left in the afternoon, hopelessly unhappy. But he had seen her and sat with her. Such intercourse as that would have to content him for the remainder of his life. The lesson of renunciation it was necessary and proper that he, as a parish priest, should learn. But the next morning, when he awoke, he felt rather vexed with her, and decided that she was rather unreasonable, not to say capricious. Then, in illustration of what he had begun to discern as one of her redeeming characteristics, there came promptly a note, which she must have written almost immediately he had gone from her. "Forgive me for my petulance yesterday. I was horrid to you, I know it, and I feel perfectly miserable at my horridness. It was so dear of you not to be angry. Jude, please still keep me as your friend and associate, with all my faults. I'll try not to be like it again. I am coming to Melchester on Saturday to get my things away from the T.S., etc. I could walk with you for half an hour, if you would like. Your repentant, Sue." Jude forgave her straightway, and asked her to call for him at the Cathedral Works when she came. 6. Meanwhile, a middle-aged man was dreaming a dream of great beauty concerning the writer of the above letter. He was Richard Phillotson, who had recently removed from the mixed village school at Lumsden, near Christminster, to undertake a large boys' school in his native town of Shaston, which stood on a hill 60 miles to the southwest as the crow flies. A glance at the place and its accessories was almost enough to reveal that the schoolmaster's plans and dreams, so long indulged in, had been abandoned for some new dream with which neither the church nor literature had much in common. Essentially an unpractical man, he was now bent on making and saving money for a practical purpose, that of keeping a wife, who, if she chose, might conduct one of the girls' schools adjoining his own. For which purpose he had advised her to go into training, since she would not marry him off-hand. About the time that Jude was removing from Mary Green to Melchester, and entering on adventures at the latter place with Sue, the schoolmaster was settling down in the new schoolhouse at Shaston. All the furniture being fixed, the books shelved, and the nails driven, he had begun to sit in his parlour during the dark winter nights and reattempt some of his old studies, one branch of which had included Roman Britannic antiquities, an unremunerative labour for a national schoolmaster, but a subject that, after his abandonment of the university scheme, had interested him as being a comparatively unworked mine, practicable to those who, like himself, had lived in lonely spots where these remains were abundant, and were seen to compel inferences in startling contrast to accepted views on the civilization of that time. A resumption of this investigation was the outward and apparent hobby of Phillotson at present. his ostensible reasons for going alone into fields where causeways, dikes, and tumuli abounded, or shutting himself up in his house with a few urns, tiles, and mosaics he had collected, instead of calling round upon his new neighbours, who for their part had showed themselves willing enough to be friendly with him. But it was not the real or the whole reason, after all. Thus, on a particular evening in the month, when it had grown quite late, to near midnight, indeed, and the light of his lamp shining from his window at a salient angle of a hill-top town over infinite miles of valley westward, announced as by words a place and person given over to study, he was not exactly studying. The interior of the room, the books, the furniture, the schoolmaster's loose coat, his attitude at the table, even the flickering of the fire, bespoke the same dignified tale of undistracted research, more than creditable to a man who had had no advantages beyond those of his own making. And yet the tale, true enough till latterly, was not true now. What he was regarding was not history. They were historic notes, written in a bold, womanly hand at his dictation some months before, and it was the clerical rendering of word after word that absorbed him. He presently took from a drawer a carefully tied bundle of letters, few, very few as correspondence counts nowadays. Each was in its envelope just as it had arrived, and the handwriting was of the same womanly character as the historic notes. He unfolded them one by one and read them musingly. At first sight there seemed in these small documents to be absolutely nothing to muse over. They were straightforward, frank letters signed Sue B., just such ones as would be written during short absences with no other thought than their speedy destruction, and chiefly concerning books in reading and other experiences of a training school, forgotten doubtless by the writer with the passing of the day of their inditing. In one of them, quite a recent note, the young woman said that she had received his considerate letter, and that it was honourable and generous of him to say he would not come to see her oftener than she desired, the school being such an awkward place for callers, and because of her strong wish that her engagement to him should not be known, which it would infallibly be if he visited her often. Over these phrases the schoolmaster pored. What precise shade of satisfaction was to be gathered from a woman's gratitude that the man who loved her had not been often to see her? The problem occupied him, distracted him. He opened another drawer, and found therein an envelope from which he drew a photograph of Sue as a child, long before he had known her, standing under trellis work with a little basket in her hand. There was another of her as a young woman, her dark eyes and hair making a very distinct and attractive picture of her, which just disclosed, too, the thoughtfulness that lay behind her lighter moods. It was a duplicate of the one she had given Jude, and would have given to any man. Phillotson brought it half-way to his lips, but withdrew it in doubt at her perplexing phrases, ultimately kissing the dead pasteboard with all the passionateness and more than all the devotion of a young man of 18. The schoolmaster's was an unhealthy-looking, old-fashioned face, rendered more old-fashioned by his style of shaving. A certain gentlemanliness had been imparted to it by nature, suggesting an inherent wish to do rightly by all. His speech was a little slow, but his tones were sincere enough to make his hesitation no defect. His greying hair was curly, and radiated from a point in the middle of his crown. There were 4 lines across his forehead, and he only wore spectacles when reading at night. It was almost certainly a renunciation forced upon him by his academic purpose rather than a distaste for women, which had hitherto kept him from closing with one of the sex in matrimony. Such silent proceedings as those of this evening were repeated many and oft times when he was not under the eye of the boys, whose quick and penetrating regard would frequently become almost intolerable to the self-conscious master in his present anxious care for Sue, making him, in the grey hours of morning, dread to meet anew the gimlet glances, lest they should read what the dream within him was. He had honourably acquiesced in Sue's announced wish that he was not often to visit her at the training school, but at length, his patience being sorely tried, he set out one Saturday afternoon to pay her an unexpected call. There, the news of her departure, expulsion as it might almost have been considered, was flashed upon him without warning or mitigation as he stood at the door, expecting in a few minutes to behold her face, and when he turned away he could hardly see the road before him. Sue had, in fact, never written a line to her suitor on the subject, although it was 14 days old. A short reflection told him that this proved nothing, a natural delicacy being as ample a reason for silence as any degree of blameworthiness. They had informed him at the school where she was living, and having no immediate anxiety about her comfort, his thoughts took the direction of a burning indignation against the training school committee. In his bewilderment, Phillotson entered the adjacent cathedral, just now in a direly dismantled state by reason of the repairs. He sat down on a block of freestone, regardless of the dusty imprint it made on his breeches, and his listless eyes following the movements of the workmen, he presently became aware that the reputed culprit, Sue's lover, Jude, was one amongst them. Jude had never spoken to his former hero since the meeting by the model of Jerusalem. Having inadvertently witnessed Phillotson's tentative courtship of Sue in the lane, there had grown up in the younger man's mind a curious dislike to think of the elder, to meet him, to communicate in any way with him, and since Phillotson's success in obtaining at least her promise had become known to Jude, he had frankly recognized that he did not wish to see or hear of his senior any more, learn anything of his pursuits, or even imagine again what excellencies might appertain to his character. On this very day of the schoolmaster's visit, Jude was expecting Sue, as she had promised, and when, therefore, he saw the schoolmaster in the nave of the building, saw, moreover, that he was coming to speak to him, he felt no little embarrassment, which Phillotson's own embarrassment prevented his observing. Jude joined him, and they both withdrew from the other workmen to the spot where Phillotson had been sitting. Jude offered him a piece of sackcloth for a cushion, and told him it was dangerous to sit on the bare block. "Yes, yes," said Phillotson abstractedly, as he reseated himself, his eyes resting on the ground as if he were trying to remember where he was. "I won't keep you long. It was merely that I have heard that you have seen my little friend Sue recently. It occurred to me to speak to you on that account. I merely want to ask about her." "I think I know what," Jude hurriedly said. "About her escaping from the training school and her coming to me?" "Yes." "Well," Jude for a moment felt an unprincipled and fiendish wish to annihilate his rival at all cost. By the exercise of that treachery, which love for the same woman renders possible to men the most honourable in every other relation of life, he could send off Phillotson in agony and defeat by saying that the scandal was true, and that Sue had irretrievably committed herself with him. But his action did not respond for a moment to his animal instinct, and what he said was, "I am glad of your kindness in coming to talk plainly to me about it. You know what they say, that I ought to marry her." "What?" "And I wish with all my soul I could." Phillotson trembled, and his naturally pale face acquired a corpse-like sharpness in its lines. "I had no idea that it was of this nature. God forbid!" "No, no," said Jude, aghast. "I thought you understood. I mean that were I in a position to marry her, or someone, and settle down instead of living in lodgings here and there, I should be glad." What he had really meant was simply that he loved her. "But since this painful matter has been opened up, what really happened?" asked Phillotson, with the firmness of a man who felt that a sharp smart was now better than a long agony of suspense hereafter. "Cases arise, and this is one, when even ungenerous questions must be put to make false assumptions impossible and to kill scandal." Jude explained readily, giving the whole series of adventures, including the night at the shepherd's, her wet arrival at his lodging, her indisposition from her immersion, their vigil of discussion, and his seeing her off next morning. "Well now," said Phillotson at the conclusion, "I take it as your final word, and I know I can believe you, that the suspicion which led to her rustication is an absolutely baseless one?" "It is," said Jude solemnly. "Absolutely, so help me God." The schoolmaster rose. Each of the twain felt that the interview could not comfortably merge in a friendly discussion of their recent experiences after the manner of friends, and when Jude had taken him round and shown him some of the features of the renovation which the old cathedral was undergoing, Phillotson bade the young man good day and went away. This visit took place about 11 o'clock in the morning, but no Sue appeared. When Jude went to his dinner at 1, he saw his beloved ahead of him in the street leading up from the north gate, walking as if no way looking for him. Speedily overtaking her, he remarked that he had asked her to come to him at the cathedral, and she had promised. "I have been to get my things from the college," she said, an observation which he was expected to take as an answer, though it was not one. Finding her to be in this evasive mood, he felt inclined to give her the information so long withheld. "You have not seen Mr. Phillotson today?" he ventured to inquire. "I have not, but I am not going to be cross-examined about him, and if you ask anything more I won't answer. It is very odd that—" He stopped, regarding her. "What?" "That you are often not so nice in your real presence as you are in your letters." "Does it really seem so to you?" said she, smiling with quick curiosity. "Well, that's strange. But I feel just the same about you, Jude. When you are gone away I seem such a cold-hearted—" As she knew his sentiment towards her, Jude saw that they were getting upon dangerous ground. It was now, he thought, that he must speak as an honest man. But he did not speak, and she continued, "It was that which made me write and say, I didn't mind your loving me, if you wanted to much." The exultation he might have felt at what that implied, or seemed to imply, was nullified by his intention, and he rested rigid till he began. "I have never told you—" "Yes, you have," murmured she. "I mean I have never told you my history, all of it. But I guess it. I know nearly." Jude looked up. Could she possibly know of that morning performance of his with Arabella, which in a few months had ceased to be a marriage more completely than by death? He saw that she did not. "I can't quite tell you here in the street," he went on, with a gloomy tongue, "and you had better not come to my lodgings. Let us go in here." The building by which they stood was the market-house, and it was the only place available, and they entered, the market being over, and the stalls and areas empty. He would have preferred a more congenial spot, but as usually happens, in place of a romantic field or solemn aisle for his tale, It was told while they walked up and down over a floor littered with rotten cabbage leaves, and amid all the usual squalors of decayed vegetable matter and unsaleable refuse. He began and finished his brief narrative, which merely led up to the information that he had married a wife some years earlier, and that his wife was living still. Almost before her countenance had time to change, she hurried out the words, "Why didn't you tell me before?" "I couldn't. It seemed so cruel to tell it." "To yourself, Jude. So it was better to be cruel to me." "No, dear darling," cried Jude passionately. He tried to take her hand, but she withdrew it. Their old relations of confidence seemed suddenly to have ended, and the antagonisms of sex to sex were left without any counterpoising predilections. She was his comrade, friend, unconscious sweetheart no longer, and her eyes regarded him in estranged silence. "I was ashamed of the episode in my life which brought about the marriage," he continued. "I can't explain it precisely now. I could have done it if you had taken it differently." "But how can I?" she burst out. "Here I have been, saying or writing that you might love me, or something of the sort, just out of charity, and all the time— Oh, it is perfectly damnable how things are," she said, stamping her foot in a nervous quiver. "You take me wrong, Sue. I never thought you cared for me at all, till quite lately, so I felt it did not matter. Do you care for me, Sue? You know how I mean. I don't like out of charity at all." It was a question which in the circumstances Sue did not choose to answer. "I suppose your wife, is a very pretty woman, even if she's wicked?" she asked quickly. "She's pretty enough, as far as that goes." "Prettier than I am, no doubt." "You are not the least alike, and I have never seen her for years. But she's sure to come back. They always do." "How strange of you to stay apart from her like this," said Sue, her trembling lip and lumpy throat belying her irony. "You, such a religious man. How will the demigods in your pantheon, I mean those legendary persons you call saints, intercede for you after this? Now, if I had done such a thing, it would have been different, and not remarkable, for I, at least, don't regard marriage as a sacrament. Your theories are not so advanced as your practice." "Sue, you are terribly cutting when you like to be. A perfect Voltaire. But you must treat me as you will." When she saw how wretched he was, she softened, and trying to blink away her sympathetic tears, said with all the winning reproachfulness of a heart-hurt woman, "Ah, you should have told me before you gave me that idea that you wanted to be allowed to love me. Ah, you should have told me before you gave me that idea that you wanted to be allowed to love me. I had no feeling before that moment at the railway station except—" For once, Sue was as miserable as he, in her attempts to keep herself free from emotion, and her less than half success. "Don't cry, dear," he implored. "I am not crying because I meant to love you, but because of your want of confidence." They were quite screened from the market square without, and he could not help putting out his arm towards her waist. His momentary desire was the means of her rallying. "No, no," she said, drawing back stringently and wiping her eyes. "Of course not. It would be hypocrisy to pretend that it would be meant as from my cousin, and it can't be in any other way." They moved on a dozen paces, and she showed herself recovered. It was distracting to Jude, and his heart would have ached less had she appeared anyhow but as she did appear, essentially large-minded and generous on reflection, despite a previous exercise of those narrow womanly humours on impulse that were necessary to give her sex. "I don't blame you for what you couldn't help," she said, smiling. How should I be so foolish? I do blame you a little bit for not telling me before, but after all it doesn't matter. We should have had to keep apart, you see, even if this had not been in your life. No, we shouldn't, Sue. This is the only obstacle. You forget that I must have loved you and wanted to be your wife, even if there had been no obstacle, said Sue, with a gentle seriousness which did not reveal her mind. And then we are cousins, and it is bad for cousins to marry, and I am engaged to somebody else. As to our going on together as we were going, in a sort of friendly way, the people round us would have made it unable to continue. Their views of the relations of man and woman are limited, as is proved by their expelling me from the school. Their philosophy only recognizes relations based on animal desire. The wide field of strong attachment, where desire plays at least only a secondary part, is ignored by them, the part of, who is it, Venus Urania. Her being able to talk learnedly showed that she was mistress of herself again, and before they parted she had almost regained her vivacious glance, her reciprocity of tone, her gay manner, and her second-thought attitude of critical largeness towards others of her age and sex. He could speak more freely now. There were several reasons against my telling you rashly. One was what I have said. Another, that it was always impressed upon me that I ought not to marry, that I belonged to an odd and peculiar family, the wrong breed for marriage. Ah, who used to say that to you? My great-aunt. She said it always ended badly with us Fawleys. That's strange. My father used to say the same to me. They stood possessed by the same thought, ugly enough, even as an assumption, that a union between them, had such been possible, would have meant a terrible intensification of unfitness, two bitters in one dish. "Oh, but there can't be anything in it," she said with nervous lightness. "Our family have been unlucky of late years in choosing mates, that's all." And then they pretended to persuade themselves that all that had happened was of no consequence, and that they could still be cousins and friends and warm correspondents, and have happy genial times when they met, even if they met less frequently than before. Their parting was in good friendship, and yet Jude's last look into her eyes was tinged with inquiry, for he felt that he did not even now quite know her mind. 7. Tidings from Sue, a day or two after, passed across Jude like a withering blast. Before reading the letter he was led to suspect that its contents were of a somewhat serious kind by catching sight of the signature, which was in her full name, never used in her correspondence with him since her first note. My dear Jude, I have something to tell you which perhaps you will not be surprised to hear, though certainly it may strike you as being accelerated, as the railway companies say of their trains. Mr. Phillotson and I are to be married quite soon, in 3 or 4 weeks. We had intended, as you know, to wait till I had gone through my course of training and obtained my certificate, so as to assist him, if necessary, in the teaching. But he generously says he does not see any object in waiting, now I am not at the training school. It is so good of him, because the awkwardness of my situation has really come about by my fault in getting expelled. Wish me joy. Remember I say you are to, and you mustn't refuse. Your affectionate cousin, Susanna Florence Mary Bridehead. Jude staggered under the news, could eat no breakfast, and kept on drinking tea because his mouth was so dry. Then presently he went back to his work and laughed the usual bitter laugh of a man so confronted. Everything seemed turning to satire. And yet what could the poor girl do, he asked himself, and felt worse than shedding tears. "Oh, Susanna Florence Mary," he said, as he worked. You don't know what marriage means." Could it be possible that his announcement of his own marriage had pricked her on to this, just as his visit to her when in liquor might have pricked her on to her engagement? To be sure, there seemed to exist these other and sufficient reasons, practical and social, for her decision. But Sue was not a very practical or calculating person, and he was compelled to think that a pique at having his secret sprung upon her had moved her to give way to Phillickson's probable representations, that the best course to prove how unfounded were the suspicions of the school authorities would be to marry him off-hand, as in fulfilment of an ordinary engagement. Sue had, in fact, been placed in an awkward corner. Poor Sue! He determined to play the Spartan, to make the best of it, and support her, but he could not write the requested good wishes for a day or two. Meanwhile, there came another note from his impatient little dear. "Jude, will you give me away? I have nobody else who could do it so conveniently as you, being the only married relation I have here on the spot, even if my father were friendly enough to be willing, which he isn't. I hope you won't think it a trouble. I have been looking at the marriage service in the prayer book, and it seems to me very humiliating that a giver away should be required at all. According to the ceremony as there printed, my bridegroom chooses me of his own will and pleasure, but I don't choose him. Somebody gives me to him, like a she-ass or she-goat or any other domestic animal. Bless your exalted views of woman, O churchman! But I forget. I am no longer privileged to tease you. Ever, Susanna Florence Mary Bridehead." Jude screwed himself up to a heroic key and replied, "My dear Sue, of course I wish you joy, and also of course I will give you away. What I suggest is that, as you have no house of your own, you do not marry from your school friends but from mine. It would be more proper, I think, since I am, as you say, the person nearest related to you in this part of the world. I don't see why you sign your letter in such a new and terribly formal way. Surely you care a bit about me still. Ever your affectionate Jude." What had jarred on him even more than the signature was a little sting he had been silent on, the phrase "married relation." What an idiot it made him seem as her lover! If Sue had written that in satire, he could hardly forgive her. If in suffering, that was another thing. His offer of his lodging must have commended itself to Phillotson at any rate, for the schoolmaster sent him a line of warm thanks, accepting the convenience. Sue also thanked him. Jude immediately moved into more commodious quarters, as much to escape the espionage of the suspicious landlady, who had been one cause of Sue's unpleasant experience, as for the sake of the room. Then Sue wrote to tell him the day fixed for the wedding, and Jude decided after inquiry that she should come into residence on the following Saturday, which would allow of a 10 days' stay in the city prior to the ceremony, sufficiently representing a nominal residence of 15. She arrived by the 10 o'clock train on the day aforesaid, Jude not going to meet her at the station by her special request that he should not lose a morning's work and pay, she said, if this were her true reason. But so well by this time did he know Sue, that the remembrance of their mutual sensitiveness at emotional crises might, he thought, have weighed with her in this. When he came home to dinner, she had taken possession of her apartment. She lived in the same house with him, but on a different floor, and they saw each other little, an occasional supper being the only meal they took together, when Sue's manner was something like that of a scared child. What she felt he did not know. Their conversation was mechanical, though she did not look pale or ill. Phillotson came frequently, but mostly when Jude was absent. On the morning of the wedding, when Jude had given himself a holiday, Sue and her cousin had breakfast together for the first and last time during this curious interval, in his room, the parlour, which he had hired for the period of Sue's residence. Seeing, as women do, how helpless he was in making the place comfortable, she bustled about. "What's the matter, Jude?" she said suddenly. He was leaning with his elbows on the table and his chin on his hands, looking into a futurity which seemed to be sketched out on the tablecloth. "Oh, nothing." "You are father, you know. That's what they call the man who gives you away." Jude could have said, "Phillidson's age entitles him to be called that," but he would not annoy her by such a cheap retort. She talked incessantly, as if she dreaded his indulgence in reflection, and before the meal was over both he and she wished they had not put such confidence in their new view of things and had taken breakfast apart. What oppressed Jude was the thought that, having done a wrong thing of this sort himself, he was aiding and abetting the woman he loved in doing a like wrong thing, instead of imploring and warning her against it. It was on his tongue to say, "You have quite made up your mind." After breakfast they went out on an errand together, moved by a mutual thought that it was the last opportunity they would have of indulging in unceremonious companionship. By the irony of fate, and the curious trick in Sue's nature of tempting Providence at critical times, she took his arm as they walked through the muddy street, a thing she had never done before in her life, and on turning the corner they found themselves close to a grey perpendicular church with a low-pitched roof, the church of St. Thomas. "That's the church," said Jude. "Where I am going to be married?" "Yes." "Indeed," she exclaimed with curiosity. "How I should like to go in and see what the spot is like where I am so soon to kneel and do it." Again he said to himself, "She does not realize what marriage means." He passively acquiesced in her wish to go in, and they entered by the western door. The only person inside the gloomy building was a charwoman cleaning. Sue still held Jude's arm, almost as if she loved him. Cruelly sweet, indeed, she had been to him that morning, but his thoughts of a penance in store for her were tempered by an ache. "I can find no way how a blow should fall, such as falls on men, nor prove too much for your womanhood." They strolled undemonstratively up the nave towards the altar railing, which they stood against in silence, turning then and walking down the nave again, her hand still on his arm, precisely like a couple just married. The too suggestive incident, entirely of her making, nearly broke down Jude. "I like to do things like this," she said in a delicate voice of an epicure in emotions, which left no doubt that she spoke the truth. "I know you do," said Jude. "They are interesting because they have probably never been done before. I shall walk down the church like this with my husband in about 2 hours, shan't I?" "No doubt you will." "Was it like this when you were married?" "Good God, Sue, don't be so awfully merciless." "There, dear one, I didn't mean it." "Ah, you are vexed," she said regretfully, as she blinked away an access of eye moisture. "And I promised never to vex you. I suppose I ought not to have asked you to bring me in here. Oh, I oughtn't. I see it now. My curiosity to hunt up a new sensation always leads me into these scrapes. Forgive me. You will, won't you, Jude?" The appeal was so remorseful that Jude's eyes were even wetter than hers as he pressed her hand for yes. "Now we'll hurry away, and I won't do it any more," she continued humbly, and they came out of the building, Sue intending to go on to the station to meet Phillotson. But the first person they encountered on entering the main street was the schoolmaster himself, whose train had arrived sooner than Sue expected. There was nothing really to demur to in her leaning on Jude's arm, but she withdrew her hand, and Jude thought that Phillotson had looked surprised. "We have been doing such a funny thing," said she, smiling candidly. "We've been to the church, rehearsing as it were, haven't we, Jude?" "How?" said Phillotson, curiously. Jude inwardly deplored what he thought to be unnecessary frankness, but she had gone too far not to explain all, which she accordingly did, telling him how they had marched up to the altar. Seeing how puzzled Phillotson seemed, Jude said as cheerfully as he could, "I'm going to buy her another little present. Will you both come to the shop with me?" "No," said Sue, "I'll go on to the house with him," and requesting her lover not to be a long time, she departed with the schoolmaster. Jude soon joined them at his rooms, and shortly after they prepared for the ceremony. Phillotson's hair was brushed to a painful extent, and his shirt collar appeared stiffer than it had been for the previous 20 years. Beyond this, he looked dignified and thoughtful, and altogether a man of whom it was not unsafe to predict that he would make a kind and considerate husband. That he adored Sue was obvious, and she could almost be seen to feel that she was undeserving his adoration. Although the distance was so short, he had hired a fly from the Red Lion, and 6 or 7 women and children had gathered by the door when they came out. The schoolmaster and Sue were unknown, though Jude was getting to be recognized as a citizen, and the couple were judged to be some relations of his from a distance, nobody supposing Sue to have been a recent pupil at the training school. In the carriage, Jude took from his pocket his extra little wedding present, which turned out to be 2 or 3 yards of white tulle, which he threw over her bonnet and all as a veil. "It looks so odd over a bonnet," she said. "I'll take the bonnet off." "Oh, no, let it stay," said Phillotson, and she obeyed. When they had passed up the church and were standing in their places, Jude found that the antecedent visit had certainly taken off the edge of this performance, but by the time they were halfway on with the service, he wished from his heart that he had not undertaken the business of giving her away. How could Sue have had the temerity to ask him to do it? A cruelty possible to herself as well as to him. Women were different from men in such matters. Was it that they were, instead of more sensitive, as reputed, more callous and less romantic, or were they more heroic? Or was Sue simply so perverse that she wilfully gave herself and him pain for the odd and mournful luxury of practising long suffering in her own person, and of being touched with tender pity for him at having made him practise it? He could perceive that her face was nervously set, and when they reached the trying ordeal of Jude giving her to Phillotson, she could hardly command herself, rather, however, as it seemed, from her knowledge of what her cousin must feel, whom she need not have had there at all, than from self-consideration. Possibly she would go on inflicting such pains again and again, and grieving for the sufferer again and again, in all her colossal inconsistency. Phillotson seemed not to notice, to be surrounded by a mist which prevented his seeing the emotions of others. As soon as they had signed their names and come away, and the suspense was over, Jude felt relieved. The meal at his lodging was a very simple affair, and at 2 o'clock they went off. In crossing the pavement to the fly she looked back, and there was a frightened light in her eyes. Could it be that Sue had acted with such unusual foolishness as to plunge into she knew not what for the sake of asserting her independence of him, of retaliating on him for his secrecy? Perhaps Sue was thus venturesome with men because she was childishly ignorant of that side of their natures which wore out women's hearts and lives. When her foot was on the carriage step, she turned round, saying that she had forgotten something. Jude and the landlady offered to get it. "No, she said, running back. "It is my handkerchief. I know where I left it." Jude followed her back. She had found it, and came holding it in her hand. She looked into his eyes with her own tearful ones, and her lips suddenly parted as if she were going to avow something, but she went on, and whatever she had meant to say remained unspoken. 8. Jude wondered if she had really left her handkerchief behind, or whether it were that she had miserably wished to tell him of a love that at the last moment she could not bring herself to express. He could not stay in his silent lodging when they were gone, and fearing that he might be tempted to drown his misery in alcohol, he went upstairs, changed his dark clothes for his white, his thin boots for his thick, and proceeded to his customary work for the afternoon. But in the cathedral he seemed to hear a voice behind him, and to be possessed with an idea that she would come back. She could not possibly go home with Phillotson, he fancied. The feeling grew and stirred. The moment that the clock struck the last of his working hours, he threw down his tools and rushed homeward. "Has anybody been for me?" he asked. Nobody had been there. As he could claim the downstairs sitting-room till 12 o'clock that night, he sat in it all the evening, and even when the clock had struck 11 and the family had retired, he could not shake off the feeling that she would come back and sleep in the little room adjoining his own, in which she had slept so many previous days. Her actions were always unpredictable. Why should she not come? Gladly would he have compounded for the denial of her as a sweetheart and wife by having her live thus as a fellow-lodger and friend, even on the most distant terms. His supper still remained spread, and going to the front door and softly setting it open, he returned to the room and sat as watchers sit on old midsummer eves, expecting the phantom of the beloved. But she did not come. Having indulged in this wild hope, he went upstairs and looked out of the window and pictured her through the evening journey to London, whither she and Phillotson had gone for their holiday. There rattling along through the damp night to their hotel, under the same sky of ribbed cloud as that he beheld, through which the moon showed its position rather than its shape, and one or two of the larger stars made themselves visible as faint nebulae only. It was a new beginning of Sue's history. He projected his mind into the future, and saw her with children more or less in her own likeness around her, but the consolation of regarding them as a continuation of her identity was denied to him, as to all such dreamers, by the wilfulness of nature in not allowing issue from one parent alone. Every desired renewal of an existence is debased by being half alloy. If at the estrangement or death of my lost love I could go and see her child, hers solely, there would be comfort in it, said Jude. And then he again uneasily saw, as he had latterly seen with more and more frequency, the scorn of nature for man's finer emotions, and her lack of interest in his aspirations. The oppressive strength of his affection for Sue showed itself on the morrow and following days yet more clearly. He could no longer endure the light of the Melchester lamps. The sunshine was as drab paint, and the blue sky as zinc. Then he received news that his old aunt was dangerously ill at Mary Green, which intelligence almost coincided with a letter from his former employer at Christminster, who offered him permanent work of a good class if he would come back. The letters were almost a relief to him. He started to visit Aunt Drusilla, and resolved to go on to Christminster to see what worth there might be in the builder's offer. Jude found his aunt even worse than the communication from the widow Edlin had led him to expect. There was every possibility of her lingering on for weeks or months, though little likelihood. He wrote to Sue informing her of the state of her aunt, and suggesting that she might like to see her aged relative alive. He would meet her at Alfredston Road the following evening, Monday, on his way back from Christminster, if she could come by the up train which crossed his down train at the station. Next morning, accordingly, he went on to Christminster, intending to return to Alfredston soon enough to keep the suggested appointment with Sue. The city of learning wore an estranged look, and he had lost all feeling for its associations. Yet as the sun made vivid lights and shades of the mullioned architecture of the facades, and drew patterns of the crinkled battlements on the young turf of the quadrangles, Jude thought he had never seen the place look more beautiful. He came to the street in which he had first beheld Sue. The chair she had occupied, when leaning over her ecclesiastical scrolls, a hog-hair brush in her hand, her girlish figure had arrested the gaze of his inquiring eyes, stood precisely in its former spot, empty. It was as if she were dead, and nobody had been found capable of succeeding her in that artistic pursuit. Hers was now the city phantom, while those of the intellectual and devotional worthies who had once moved him to emotion were no longer able to assert their presence there. However, here he was, and in fulfilment of his intention he went on to his former lodging in Beersheba, near the ritualistic church of St. Silas. The old landlady who opened the door seemed glad to see him again, and bringing some lunch, informed him that the builder who had employed him had called to inquire his address. Jude went on to the stone yard where he had worked, but the old sheds and bankers were distasteful to him. He felt it impossible to engage himself to return and stay in this place of vanished dreams. He longed for the hour of the homeward train to Alfredston, where he might probably meet Sue. Then, for one ghastly half-hour of depression caused by these scenes, there returned upon him that feeling which had been his undoing more than once, that he was not worth the trouble of being taken care of either by himself or others. And during this half-hour he met Tinker Taylor, the bankrupt ecclesiastical ironmonger, at Fourways, who proposed that they should adjourn to a bar and drink together. They walked along the street till they stood before one of the great palpitating centres of Christminster life, the inn wherein he formerly had responded to the challenge to rehearse the Creed in Latin, now a popular tavern with a spacious and inviting entrance, which gave admittance to a bar that had been entirely renovated and refitted in modern style since Jude's residence here. Tinker Taylor drank off his glass and departed, saying it was too stylish a place now for him to feel at home in, unless he was drunker than he had money to be just then. Jude was longer finishing his, and stood abstractedly silent in the, for the minute, almost empty place. The bar had been gutted and newly arranged throughout, mahogany fixtures having taken the place of the old painted ones, while at the back of the standing space there were stuffed sofa benches. The room was divided into compartments in the approved manner, between which were screens of ground glass in mahogany framing, to prevent topers in one compartment being put to the blush by the recognitions of those in the next. On the inside of the counter, two barmaids leant over the white-handled beer engines, and the row of little silvered taps inside, dripping into a pewter trough. Feeling tired, and having nothing more to do till the train left, Jude sat down on one of the sofas. At the back of the barmaids rose bevel-edged mirrors with glass shelves running along their front, on which stood precious liquids that Jude did not know the name of, in bottles of topaz, sapphire, ruby, and amethyst. The moment was enlivened by the entrance of some customers into the next compartment, and the starting of the mechanical tell-tale of moneys received, which emitted a ting-ting every time a coin was put in. The barmaid attending to this compartment was invisible to Jude's direct glance, though a reflection of her back in the glass behind her was occasionally caught by his eyes. He had only observed this listlessly, when she turned her face for a moment to the glass to set her hair tidy. Then he was amazed to discover that the face was Arabella's. If she had come on to his compartment, she would have seen him, but she did not, this being presided over by the maiden on the other side. Abby was in a black gown with white linen cuffs and a broad white collar, and her figure, more developed than formerly, was accentuated by a bunch of daffodils that she wore on her left bosom. In the compartment she served stood an electroplated fountain of water over a spirit lamp, whose blue flame sent a steam from the top, all this being visible to him only in the mirror behind her, which also reflected the faces of the men she was attending to, one of them a handsome, dissipated young fellow, possibly an undergraduate, who had been relating to her an experience of some humorous sort. "Oh, Mr. Cockman, now! How can you tell such a tale to me in my innocence?" she cried gaily. "Mr. Cockman, what do you use to make your moustache curl so beautiful?" As the young man was clean-shaven, the retort provoked a laugh at his expense. "Come," said he, "I'll have a curacao, and a light, please." She served the liquor from one of the lovely bottles, and striking a match, held it to his cigarette with ministering archness while he whiffed. "Well, have you heard from your husband lately, my dear?" he asked. "Not a sound," said she. "Where is he?" "I left him in Australia. I suppose he's there still." Jude's eyes grew rounder. "What made you part from him?" "Don't you ask questions and you won't hear lies." "Come then, give me my change which you've been keeping from me for the last quarter of an hour, and I'll romantically vanish up the street of this picturesque city." She handed the change over the counter, in taking which he caught her fingers and held them. There was a slight struggle and titter, and he bade her good-bye and left. Jude had looked on with the eye of a dazed philosopher. It was extraordinary how far removed from his life Arabella now seemed to be. He could not realize their nominal closeness. And, this being the case, in his present frame of mind he was indifferent to the fact that Arabella was his wife indeed. The compartment that she served emptied itself of visitors, and after a brief thought he entered it and went forward to the counter. Arabella did not recognize him for a moment. Then their glances met. She started, till a humorous impudence sparkled in her eyes, and she spoke. "Well, I'm blessed! I thought you were underground years ago." "Oh, I never heard anything of you, or I don't know that I should have come here. But never mind. What shall I treat you to this afternoon? A scotch and soda? Come, anything the house will afford for old acquaintance' sake." "Thanks, Arabella," said Jude without a smile, "but I don't want anything more than I've had." The fact was that her unexpected presence there had destroyed at a stroke his momentary taste for strong liquor as completely as if it had whisked him back to his milk-fed infancy. "That's a pity, now you could get it for nothing." "How long have you been here?" "About 6 weeks. I returned from Sydney 3 months ago. I always liked this business, you know." "I wonder why you came to this place." "Well, as I say, I thought you were gone to glory, and being in London I saw the situation in an advertisement. Nobody was likely to know me here, even if I had minded, for I was never in Christminster in my growing up." "Why did you return from Australia?" "Oh, I had my reasons. Then you are not a Don yet?" "No." "Not even a reverend?" "No." "Nor so much as a rather reverend dissenting gentleman?" "I am as I was." "True. You look so." She idly allowed her fingers to rest on the pull of the beer engine as she inspected him critically. He observed that her hands were smaller and whiter than when he had lived with her, and that on the hand which pulled the engine she wore an ornamental ring set with what seemed to be real sapphires, which they were indeed, and were much admired as such by the young men who frequented the bar. "So you pass as having a living husband?" he continued. Yes. I thought it might be awkward if I called myself a widow, as I should have liked. True. I am known here a little. I didn't mean on that account, for as I said, I didn't expect you. It was for other reasons. What were they? I don't care to go into them, she replied evasively. I make a very good living, and I don't know that I want your company. Here a chappie with no chin and a moustache like a lady's eyebrow came and asked for a curiously compounded drink, and Arabella was obliged to go and attend to him. "We can't talk here," she said, stepping back a moment. "Can't you wait till 9? Say yes, and don't be a fool. I can get off duty 2 hours sooner than usual if I ask. I'm not living in the house at present." He reflected and said gloomily, "I'll come back. I suppose we'd better arrange something." "Oh, bother arranging. I'm not going to arrange anything." "But I must know a thing or two, and as you say, we can't talk here. Very well, I'll call for you." Depositing his unemptied glass, he went out and walked up and down the street. Here was a rude flounce into the pellucid sentimentality of his sad attachment to Sue. Though Arabella's word was absolutely untrustworthy, he thought there might be some truth in her implication that she had not wished to disturb him, and had really supposed him dead. However, there was only one thing now to be done, and that was to play a straightforward part, the law being the law, and the woman between whom and himself there was no more unity than between East and West being in the eye of the Church one person with him. Having to meet Arabella here, it was impossible to meet Sue at Alfredston as he had promised. At every thought of this a pang had gone through him, but the conjuncture could not be helped. Arabella was perhaps an intended intervention to punish him for his unauthorized love. Passing the evening, therefore, in a desultory waiting about the town, wherein he avoided the precincts of every cloister and hall, because he could not bear to behold them, he repaired to the tavern bar while the 101 strokes were resounding from the great bell of Cardinal College, a coincidence which seemed to him gratuitous irony. The inn was now brilliantly lighted up, and the scene was altogether more brisk and gay. The faces of the bar-maidens had risen in colour, each having a pink flush on her cheek. Their manners were still more vivacious than before, more abandoned, more excited, more sensuous, and they expressed their sentiments and desires less euphemistically, laughing in a lackadaisical tone without reserve. The bar had been crowded with men of all sorts during the previous hour, and he had heard from without the hubbub of their voices, but the customers were fewer at last. He nodded to Arabella, and told her that she would find him outside the door when she came away. "But you must have something with me first," she said, with great good humour. "Just an early nightcap. I always do. Then you can go out and wait a minute, as it is best we should not be seen going together." She drew a couple of liqueur glasses of brandy, and though she had evidently, from her countenance, already taken in enough alcohol either by drinking or, more probably, from the atmosphere she had breathed for so many hours, she finished hers quickly. He also drank his, and went outside the house. In a few minutes she came, in a thick jacket and a hat with a black feather. "I live quite near," she said, taking his arm, "and can let myself in by a latch-key at any time. What arrangement do you want to come to?" "Oh, none in particular," he answered, thoroughly sick and tired, his thoughts again reverting to Alfredston and the train he did not go by, the probable disappointment of Sue that he was not there when she arrived, and the missed pleasure of her company on the long and lonely climb by starlight up the hills to Mary Green. "I ought to have gone back, really. My aunt is on her deathbed, I fear." "I'll go over with you tomorrow morning. I think I could get a day off." There was something particularly uncongenial in the idea of Arabella, who had no more sympathy than a tigress with his relations or him, coming to the bedside of his dying aunt and meeting Sue. Yet he said, "Of course, if you'd like to, you can." "Well, that we'll consider. Now, until we have come to some agreement, it is awkward our being together here, where you are known and I am getting known, though without any suspicion that I have anything to do with you. As we are going towards the station, supposing we take the 9:40 train to Aldbrickham, we shall be there in little more than half an hour, and nobody will know us for one night, and we shall be quite free to act as we choose till we have made up our minds whether we'll make anything public or not." "As you like." "Then wait till I get 2 or 3 things. This is my lodging. Sometimes when late I sleep at the hotel where I am engaged, so nobody will think anything of my staying out." She speedily returned, and they went on to the railway and made the half-hour's journey to Aldbrickham, where they entered a third-rate inn near the station in time for a late supper. 9. On the morrow, between 9 and half-past, they were journeying back to Christminster, the only 2 occupants of a compartment in a third-class railway carriage. Having, like Jude, made rather a hasty toilette to catch the train, Arabella looked a little frowsy, and her face was very far from possessing the animation which had characterized it at the bar the night before. When they came out of the station, she found that she still had half an hour to spare before she was due at the bar. They walked in silence a little way out of the town in the direction of Alfredston.